You'll understand from my position, I don't want to be talking about a sum of money as being, the holy grail in terms of investments. I want to be saying, look at that transition to green steel in Port Talbot.
Yeah.
This government's got it wrong because it's spending £500
But
million
Labour did.
on those 3,000 job losses.
You did put a figure on it.
Will make the difference in that.
Yeah, you did put a figure on it. It was Labour's own policy to talk about 28 billion.
No, that is a fair point. And also, what we were trying to get across there is we wanted to reach the level of ambition that experts were saying was necessary to deliver on those things. But of course, when explaining what that will deliver, I want to be talking about warm homes, electric vehicle battery factories, green steel, the things that will do. And it's also important to say, people understand this. It's not a sum of money on top of what the government have spent themselves. They're already putting in a fairly significant sum. It's about over time getting to that level of ambition whilst making clear how much you can spend, how much you can invest is always going to be governed by your fiscal rules.
Was the right decision taken to force out the chairman of the Post Office, Henry Staunton, by the government?
Well, it's imperative that the leadership of the Post Office are able to deal with the scale of the scandal that we have seen. I'm afraid it appears to be getting worse every day. Now, only the government can tell us why they believe the leadership needed to change in this occasion. But of course, this is more than just about any one person. This is something fundamentally about how the Post Office comes to terms with the scale of the scandal, tells the public it will put it right, gives the public confidence in it. And of course, the priority has got to be the exoneration of the sub-postmasters and getting them compensation as soon as possible. So there's a lot that needs addressing here by the government. And of course, we've said we'll play our part in terms of what will need to happen in Parliament to do some of that.
He wasn't at the Post Office at the time of the scandal. Does this look a little bit like trying to shift the blame from government ministers towards the Post Office, and in this case, someone who wasn't directly involved?
Well, it will be down to the government to say why this particular decision has been taken. When it comes to where blame should be attributed, there's a lot that does need to be addressed. This goes back many years. I think everyone needs to have some self-reflection about it, but everyone has to have the resolve to fix it. Now, the government have made this particular decision. As I say, they must have reasons for that. They will have to tell us what those are, but we will need to restore the public's confidence in the Post Office to do that. And I think this is actually, it's even more than just the Post Office, to be honest. It's how we perform the functions of the British state, how these agencies report back to ministers, how they report back to Parliament, what happens when they are going wrong, how can we tell the public this kind of thing will not happen again in future. So there's a lot that needs to go on here, but you're right to say, of course, that the question mark will be if people who weren't involved when the scandal took place are now being moved on. Surely there's a reason why the government feels they cannot address what needs to happen to restore people's faith in a fundamentally important British institution.
In terms of public appointments, and I appreciate the Post Office is not theoretically a public appointment, there's been a lot of controversy in recent years. One thinks of the BBC or Ofcom or other roles like that. How will New Labour do things, or how will the Labour Party do things different if they get into government?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. And actually, a lot of the businesses I talk to as well feel it's not transparent how businesses are engaged by government, how advice is sought, who gets called in, how does the state, the government engage properly to make sure it's getting the proper diversity of views about that. So we have, for instance, in my department, a little bit of work going on at the minute that Ian Anderson is doing for us about how can the formal engagement from business be better with the government, how can we improve on that. But also I think we need to make clear that public appointments should be done transparently on the basis of who is best for the job, not who has links to the government or, in some cases, who might have been a staff member or a donor to a political party. We've got to recognise there is a real, genuine crisis of trust in British government after the last few years, and it's a big part of what needs to happen to fix, again, people's confidence, but also in the proper functioning of how government and the state should be.
I mean, do you think you need some kind of statutory independent body to oversee these sort of appointments rather than just having ministers announcing or not announcing why they put people in or indeed push them out?
I think the process has to guarantee that people are there on merit, and I do feel, to be honest, that the government has such a poor record in terms of living standards and public services that you're now seeing this kind of culture war where they're blaming institutions or saying they've been captured or presenting us something. They need something to campaign against, weak as that argument is, because they cannot campaign on their record. And I think for a lot of British people, this is just a distraction. This is not really what they are concerned about. They care about jobs, living standards, wages, public services. But because the government's record in that area is so poor, we're seeing them trying to divert attention away. And I think all people will want to know is there'll be proper, transparent processes and people will be appointed on merit to those jobs.
You've got another big meeting with business people this week. You want to be close to business. Is there a danger, perhaps, that you're getting too close to business and not really thinking about the interests at the other end, which is the public, the consumer of these business services?
No, I will never do that. I'm proud of our relationship with business. I'm proud that the majority of businesses now look to Labour to be the government that they need, and I think you can't deliver for working people unless you're attracting businesses and investment. I've said to you before, I think the fact we have the lowest business investment in the G7 is a major problem for the British economy. We're also absolutely ambitious around employment standards. We have our New Deal for working people. Actually, there's a pro-business argument for some of that because it's about a level playing field in the gig economy and making sure people have security in the workplace, which has got to be the basis of a strong economy. So I think we get the balance right. We call out abuses. I mean, you may remember the terrible fire and rehire scandal with P&O Ferries. We'll never accept that, but we do believe we've got what we call a pro-business, pro-worker platform that brings those things together. And to deliver for working people, you've got to have that positive relationship with business, as well as, of course, recognising it is, I think, a sign of how Labour's changed since 2019 and how our credibility on the economy has been transformed in the last few years.
Because, I mean, some people would say the lesson of the post office scandal is that ministers ganged up with the post office against the little people, the sub-postmasters.
I think there is definitely a part of the terrible post office scandal which is about how government functions, how the information to ministers wasn't transparent, wasn't correct, let's be frank, it wasn't the truth. That came out, and again how government contracts with private businesses, the Fujitsu element of this. There's a lot to learn from there, but on terms of what we need on the economy, look, people in the UK have had a stagnant economy for over a decade. They're seeing their public services run down. That is fundamentally what the next government has got to address, and all of our platform, whether it's improving our trading terms with the EU, sorting out the planning system, having a proper industrial strategy, these are all things that are necessary to do that. But I think you've got to recognise no government will turn around the economy unless it's got a strong, robust relationship with the private sector. And the fact that businesses do look to Labour now as the best party to provide them with the stability they need, to increase investments, to get the talent they need in, to invest in the workforce, that says a lot. But we recognise it's always about delivering fundamentally better living standards for the British people. That's what we're about. That's what we're trying to deliver.
Is Labour 100% signed up to giving businesses transparency, though? Because you've gone back and forth over this £28 million investment figure, haven't you? £28 billion investment figure. I mean, no one's really clear about where you're going to land on that, I don't think. Businesses certainly aren't.
Well, I'll try and clear that up. We're committed to public investment that is designed to leverage in a much greater amount of private investment. We want the transition to net zero to deliver things for the British economy and for working people. Now, okay, how much you can spend, obviously, is determined by the health of the economy, and it's, for us, governed by what we call our fiscal rules. So we want to see UK government debt falling at the end of a parliament. So if you're making investments to grow the size of your economy and your debt is falling as a proportion of that as a result, that is exactly what you want to do. But also you'll understand from my position, I don't want to be talking about a sum of money as being the holy grail in terms of investments. I want to be saying, look at that transition to green steel in Port Talbot. Yeah. This government's got it wrong because it's spending £500 million on those 3,000 job losses.
You did put a figure on it.
Will make the difference in that.
Yeah, you did put a figure on it. It was Labour's own policy to talk about 28 billion.
No, that is a fair point. And also, what we were trying to get across there is we wanted to reach the level of ambition that experts were saying was necessary to deliver on those things. But of course, when explaining what that will deliver, I want to be talking about warm homes, electric vehicle battery factories, green steel, the things that will do. And it's also important to say, people understand this. It's not a sum of money on top of what the government have spent themselves. They're already putting in a fairly significant sum. It's about over time getting to that level of ambition whilst making clear how much you can spend, how much you can invest, is always going to be governed by your fiscal rules. And that is not, by the way, limiting our ambition. That's reflecting, and Liz Truss is a good example of this. If you don't have that discipline, you'll end up spending more on debt interest rather than what you really want to do, which is delivering key investments on that transition to give people better living standards.
You also do need clarity as well as a sort of a direction of travel. And I think it's fair to say, I mean, you've just sort of you've alluded to it there, that Labour has had a bit of a problem with this policy. Would it have been better not to have had to name a figure at all? Do you regret doing that?
Well, look, I don't think that's particularly helpful to us to consider that. I think what we've got to do is recognise we've got to get across that level of ambition for the British economy, for public and private investment to deliver the transition. We can give the public examples of where it's going wrong, so we can do a better way forward on some of that. But of course, since we made that announcement, you've had things like the Liz Truss disastrous mini budget, you've had the cost of borrowing going up, you've had a series of fiscal events from the government. We've always got to operate as the opposition within essentially the envelope of what the government are doing, because that's your starting point. Then you say how you'll do things differently. That is just the reality of opposition. But we're really strongly committed to a better transition to net zero, an economy that's growing more strongly in every part of the country. Public investment is only part of that. Industrial strategy, planning changes, how the apprenticeship levy works, changes to national grid, improving the relationship with the EU, our New Deal for working people. It's a big platform from Labour on the economy, and we've got to get that across at all times as well.
We're talking a lot on the programme today about the nastiness in politics at the moment, and what the next general election might be like. I just want to ask you about something that happened to you this week. You had to be escorted away from a meeting in the back of a police car with Angela Rayner because a group of protesters were screaming at you both, actually. I mean, how did that feel to you? It was a Labour meeting. It was a meeting where really, in theory, that shouldn't have happened. I mean, it shouldn't happen in any context. But to have to leave in a police car, I mean, did that feel unsafe to you?
Well, yeah, look, some protesters infiltrated a Labour event. That's something Labour politicians have had to put up with for 100 years or more. It's just something you have to prepare for if you're a senior politician and you're used to doing those large-scale public events. We didn't specifically have to leave in a police car. That's how we got to the event, because of some of the security arrangements in place for some people who were there at that event. I won't say more about those details, but look, I do worry about the general state of politics in the UK. I think some of the nastiness of the election campaign will partly be because the government can't campaign on living standards or public services, so that's why we will have some of this. But I think it's incumbent on everyone to try and improve the tone and the tenor of how British politics operates. I worry sometimes we'll not attract other people to become politicians, which is clearly important in a democracy, unless the health of the political system is one where people are having serious arguments about serious issues. So we should all be concerned about it, and I think we should all work to make it as better or as good as it can be.
Couple of quick questions topically. Do you have any problem with leading universities taking measures to encourage foreign students, basically because they're strapped for cash and they pay more money?
Well, look, I think foreign students play a major role in the soft power of the UK and in the health of leading British universities. I think it's reasonable to say you can believe that alongside the fact that coming to university in the UK can't be a backdoor into the immigration system. You've got to have the balance between those two things correctly, and I think there's got to be parity in terms of entry requirements onto courses, because that's just a simple matter of fairness. So I think the system can work to deliver all of those things. I'm aware of the story we've seen. I'm not sure of the detail of it yet, but I think we all know what we would want that higher education system to deliver, and it's incumbent on universities and the government to deliver that.
And just finally on the whole situation in the Middle East at the moment, does the Labour Party support the decision to suspend aid to UNRWA, the organisation working for the UN in Gaza?
Well, these are extremely serious allegations about UNRWA, but I think we all have to recognise that the absolute moral imperative, emergency humanitarian imperative, is to make sure sufficient aid gets into Gaza. So there'll have to be an investigation into these allegations, but whatever the outcome of that is, I would want to be absolutely certain that the level of aid that is required is getting into the people who need it. And I think we all have to bear that in mind, whatever the outcome of this particular investigation, serious as they are. We've got to recognise getting aid into Gaza is an absolute humanitarian imperative.
I mean, that sounds like a no, you don't support it.
Well, there's got to be an investigation into very serious allegations, but I would worry with any decision that would prevent the aid getting into the people who very clearly need it.
Jonathan Reynolds, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.